to my weekly roundup. This is Fretboard Refugee, my YouTube channel. Just gonna have a little sip of my coffee here. So this is the 9th episode of our weekly roundup show. And for those of you who are new to the channel, because I know I got a lot of new viewers this past week, this all started as a way of me kind of just logging my progress. This was going to be for my eyes only. I was going to record some songs and just sort of post them to people who I'm working on them with, whether in forums or Facebook groups, whatever. And then I kind of decided, what if I sort of summarized what I've been learning and working on and talked about it like a podcast. So I started doing that with a weekly show where I just went over some of the songs I've been playing and some of the concepts I've been using, and then it expanded to doing a Tuesday show where we explored an alternate tuning, the history of the tuning, or a lick in that tuning, or whatever, and that's Alternate Tuning Tuesday. And we also started a Theory Thursday where we talk about something like what's a major scale, how does it work, how do the chords of a major key derive from the major scale, and so on. This past week I've been playing a lot of fingerstyle acoustic blues, and I decided to kind of do what I would want to know about that style if I was going into it for the first time, sort of an FAQ for a beginner by a beginner. And that really took off. That got almost 120 views within 48 hours, which I think is more than I had previously had on anything that I had ever put up. And then my Alternate Tuning Tuesday that week also took off with over 200 views for a badly played drop D lick, but a really cool lick. But I did not play it very well. So presumably I've got some new viewers, so welcome to this space. This is the 9th time I have done this weekly roundup. I've been playing guitar for just over 9 months, and fascinated with this particular fingerstyle blues genre, country blues, acoustic blues, whatever you want to call it. This is like, for those of you who are new here, this is something that I do to, not because I'm an expert. I am far from an expert. I am a beginner. This is something I do to cement my learning by trying to teach it. By trying to articulate what I've learned, I'm forced to understand it better. I'm forced to understand distinctions that I might not make in my head if I'm just learning it for me, but I have to make if I'm trying to explain it out loud to someone else. I've found it to be a very useful learning tool. If it's also useful for teaching, that's a bonus, but I make no claims to be a teacher. I make no claims to be somebody you should follow or listen to. I am the blind, hopefully not leading the blind, but helping the blind stumble towards some kind of competence here. So, got a kind of written out outline here. Please bear with me. All right, so the week ahead, what are we going to do this week? On Tuning Tuesday, I'm going to continue to explore drop D tuning, and I'm going to kind of talk about, well, first of all, I'm going to hopefully play that lick that I played last week a little better. We're going to talk about the various bluesy things you can do in drop D tuning and why it's suitable for blues. We've covered in the past the fact that in drop D, this is not in drop D, so I won't actually play it, that you have these bottom 3 strings can be a 1-finger power chord, that because of the interval you can just bar anywhere on there and you can have a major chord, almost like the whole fretboard would be in an open tuning. But because it's only this top string that's changed, you also have all your high string voicings that we use in fingerstyle blues available to you, like your kind of A7 voicing here, your kind of E7 voicing here, and your voicings all the way up the fretboard. Like you have more E7 here. You have that A7 that you can just move anywhere. You move it 2 steps up and it's a B7. So you still have access to all those, and you have access to those power chords. That makes drop D a powerful improvisational and compositional tool. So what I'm hoping to try to do is take the tune I was playing at the beginning there, the David Hamburger Vamp, which is a teaching piece he wrote. Well, really it's just a vamp on an E chord. It's a 1-chord tune with call and response licks, and we're going to talk a little more about that later. But I'm going to try to do something like that in drop D without practicing it beforehand, because all those licks are kind of just derived from the shape of the E minor pentatonic scale on the high strings, alternating with the E on the bass. So should be possible if I've got a D in the bass to sort of do the same kind of thing in drop D without too much preparation, and we'll see how that looks. It might go well, it might go horribly, might be embarrassing, but it should be a learning exercise, and I think there's something to be gained by trying to go into it cold. I am going to have a fretboard diagram in front of me with the shapes of the D minor pentatonic scale, so I sort of have a reference, but I'm not going to think too much about where those intervals are or try to create the same sound. I'm just going to try to create licks that work and form a call and response paradigm there. Theory Thursday, I'm going to talk about the basics of harmony. I'm going to talked about how to find intervals on the fretboard in the past. So I'm going to go about it from the opposite direction. We're going to go from a scale shape to a bass string and try to find, if we're in, we could just use drop D. If we have a drop D tuned guitar, then our bass string is D, a low D. So what does D harmonize with? Well, it harmonizes with D minor, D major pentatonic, D minor pentatonic. It also harmonizes with other notes. How do we think about that? How can we use that? What are some quick, easy ways to play with that? We'll talk about that on Thursday. So tunes I've been working on. I kind of played you a little bit of that David Hamburger Vamp going in. That is it is a call and response in the key of E. So it's all within an E chord or an E scale. Let's kind of show what that looks like really quick. So we have a steady bass on the low E string. That's the heartbeat of the whole thing. And we have our basic low string lick. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. That's the call. And then the responses have variants. And then there is a lick that's a little harder, but it answers that entire back and forth. It's kind of an answer to a response to the call and response. If you want to be Hegelian about it, it's the synthesis to the thesis and antithesis. And that kind of goes like this. I don't have that one down nearly as well yet, but let's just play it from, so 1. So the structure of the whole thing is this call, and then it cycles through a few variants of that response, and then the whole thing is answered with that one harder lick there, that was horrible, but that is the answer to the call and response. And then it does the same thing, but there's some more complex versions of this thing. There's one that sort of goes up there with the bend, and then there's a few variants of the the response, there's a few variants of that, and then the whole thing kind of ties up. It comes together beautifully as a piece. It's all based in one chord. It was very hard to get under my fingers. I've been noodling with this for months, and the timing was elusive to me. It's kind of the vamp itself, the one call that everything's a response to. So you got this 1, 2, 3, 4 pulse going, and then 1, 2, and you have that higher E, and then on the 3 you have that G. 4 is the open A, and then you have a 4 and is a hammer on the G, and then you're at the 1 of the next bar. That is really tricky to get if you haven't played it right, but once you've played it right, it's easy to get. There's a lot of things like that in guitar. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Feel that? There's a kind of it goes into the next measure in a way that's very hard to just see on the music in front of you, but once you get it, you get it. The response phrase that goes with that is relatively easy. I had that down before I ever had that down, and once I had the two of them, it's just a matter of getting this guy here up to speed. That one's tricky, but I'm getting there. Soon I'll have that whole piece under my fingers, and then I will have, well, much like, that brings me to the other tune I'm working on, the Spike Driver Blues. This is kind of a vamp on the G chord, because and this one's an alternate thumb feel. But the only real chords in this are G and G7. And G7's just kind of an accent there. There's that G7 as an accent. Back to regular G. And this is where we came in. And that's the most basic arrangement. There's some variants. There's a version of the main lick that I've almost been using between choruses of that entire 12 bars. This kind of thing. That kind of thing. And you can get more complex with it. There are so many different arrangements of this tune out there. I'm just trying to get the basic one, the most stripped down arrangement, up to speed, and trying to do a more complex thing, almost as a chorus between the choruses, if that makes sense. A chorus in the pop music sense between the choruses in the blues music sense, if anyone can follow that. I don't know a better way to put it right now, but we'll look at that later. I'm continuing to use that 6 steps to 12-bar blues in E David Hamburger exercise, which is very similar to the vamp, but it's just building from the ground up. Steady thumb bass, then you layer on a shuffle 8th note. Then you start doing things on the 4 beat. And I'm using this just as a Zen exercise. Keep it slow, add things in. If I get them, keep going. If I miss them, slow it down and build back up. And this has been a game changer for my entire fingerstyle approach. I'm going to talk a little more about that as we get to our theme and learning principle of the week. I've been also working on my Slow as Lightning, that another 12 bar in E that's a little less little less rigorously structured in terms of the bass. It's just more melodic. We've heard that one before. I won't replay it here, but the timing on that one is tricky because there's no consistent dead thumb bass or even alternate thumb bass. It's kind of, there's places where it's triplet feel, there's places where it's not. I'm working on my timing on that. I'm hoping to do a new performance of that one soon. I'm trying to get, with my alternate thumb, I'm trying to get a little bit out of the key of G strictly. So I've been trying to get this key of C version of Since I Laid My Burdens Down in the Mississippi John Hurt style. Biggest problem I'm having there is weird buzzy noises in my C chord, just as a matter of stretching up to this kind of position where I'm on both strings. I've experimented with being permanently on both of those strings, and my hand is gradually getting used to that stretch and trying not to mute the strings next to it. And I've also experimented with keeping my ring finger going back and forth between them, leaving my pinky free to fret down here. But that's got its own challenges. So I'm working on both, trying to get that up to speed. That opens up a whole new world of tunes, because so much of Mississippi John Hurt, Reverend Gary Davis, a lot of the guys who do alternate thumb, a lot of the guys who do ragtime fingerstyle, they spend a lot of time in the key of C. And once I get that chord down, actually I found the C's easier or harder than the F's, which was a surprise. F's are definitely harder when you're strumming. But if I get that C chord down, I get that thumb down in that space, and I'm kind of using repetitive exercises to get there, then I think that'll open up that whole new world for me. The other thing I'm working on is St. James Infirmary Blues, which is an A minor blues. And I've kind of focused on strummy versions of that just to get the song in my head while I work on the melody fingerstyle. And it's kind of addictive to strum because it's kind of... Also my first 8-bar blues. I'm really excited about getting that under my fingers. So that's what I'm working on. Theme of the week, right hand considerations in fingerstyle, specifically fingerstyle blues, but not so specifically. Let me tell you what I mean by that. The right hand often among beginner guitarists is an afterthought. You get a strumming pattern down, focus is on fretting right, getting your chord shapes right, getting your chord changes faster. Once you're picking, you're picking. Occasionally you'll learn a new strumming pattern, or you'll learn something like where you're alternating bass strings. But fingerstyle is different because each of these is a pick, really, especially the thumb. So there's some serious considerations about how you hold your right hand, where you hold your right hand. First variable I'm going to talk about is the angle of your hand. My instinct is to kind of be here, where my pinch is a pinch. It's across from each thing. The problem with that is you start running into your thumb and your fingers start running into each other. That is a problem. Now, if you're doing like arpeggiated accompaniment style. You can sort of get out of your way. But once you're doing more complex patterns, or patterns that maybe start low and come up, you definitely start getting in the way of your own fingers. So the usual advice given is to hold your hand more this way, where your thumb is kind of up here and your fingers are back here. It's very awkward at first. It takes some getting used to. There's another consideration here specifically for blues, and that is the entire idea of dynamics and contrast and what we might call right hand palm muting. Let's go back to this this kind of low, this E string steady bass exercise. That's some bass. It sounds good, right? What if we do a pinch? You can definitely hear those distinct notes, but it could be more distinct. So what often happens in fingerstyle blues is some degree of palm muting. If you see, I just put my hand near the bridge. Now there's no note at all, right? It's just kind of a thump, 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 and there's a lot more contrast between those. I don't really want a thump. I still want it to be in key. So what if I move it a little further back on the bridge? Man, that's a much more percussive sound, but it's still recognizably an E. That's pretty cool. That's the kind of thing that a lot of these guys are going for. And what's really cool about that is when I start hitting notes against it, man, the sustain is different, the whole tone is different. It's almost like two different instruments, which is kind of what we're going for. The problem comes in, well, the more I get the pad of my thumb where it's useful to mute, the more I'm in my way of my fingers. So guys will really experiment with this position. And I've been experimenting a lot with that, and I have not really arrived at a satisfactory solution yet. Kind of trying to focus on my thumb being out front and my fingers being curled behind, but that makes the mute more targeted on the lower strings, which is kind of the point, right? So let's say we're doing, forget about steady thumb for a second, let's do alternate thumb. Let's go back to that spike driver blues groove. What's cool here is we have a lot more muting on the 6th string than we do on the 4th, right? That puts a weird kind of emphasis on the 3 and 4, the 2 and 4 beats, which is kind of where we want the emphasis. Those are the beats we want to emphasize in the blues anyway. So this gives us more of a much more of a percussive pretty cool. That's the kind of thing we're going for. That has been very hard for me to get consistent. What I would recommend to you if you want to work on this is just establish a base. Forget about other notes for a second. You might want to do a pinch occasionally just for the contrast, but just get a thumb groove going. And then move your hand very slightly towards the sound hole. Get your muting too far towards the sound hole, it's not a note anymore, it's just a thumb. Get it too far, it's not even a thumb. You lighten up a little bit, it's almost back to being just a note. At this point, it's just a note. So somewhere around here is the sweet spot. And it might vary depending on the song, depending on the effect you're going for. The key is not exactly how it sounds, but that it has some contrast to those high string notes, those treble notes. That's something I've been working on and trying to integrate into my blues. That is basically what you might call a set of right hand considerations for fingerstyle blues. Another consideration is the thumb. Now, everybody talks about the thumb. I think it was Pete Seeger who was explaining his guitar style and finger picking in general, who said you have to have an educated thumb. And Kyle Orla did a great video about that. Like, what does that even mean? Well, it means that your thumb is what's controlling the show, because your thumb is driving the bass. And then your fingers are working around the thumb to establish the groove, and any melody is just going to be on top of that. So your thumb is really calling the shots, especially if you're going to be alternate picking. Now, and especially if you're going to be doing true alternate picking, where you're 6, 4, 5, 4, 6, 4, 5, 4. Once you start adding notes to that, your thumb's kind of on its own to keep that beat going. You have to have that down. You have to have that unconscious. So training the thumb, even independently of the other fingers, is a big part of that. The wisdom or lack thereof of assigning fingers. Now, that's a big debate, and that's something that varies by subgenre. There are people who do arpeggiated fingerstyle, this kind of thing. Where there are strict rules. The index finger is always on the third string. That never changes. Or it changes from chord to chord. Which string it's assigned to changes from chord to chord, but it never hits multiple strings within one chord. That's one extreme. The other extreme is what somebody like Lightning Hopkins does, where, you know, you might be anything that's not on one of the bass strings is picked with the index finger and only the index finger. His thumb and index finger, there is no cross-pollination. There are no extra fingers ever. You just move your index finger faster. Those are obviously extreme positions. For the most part, I tend to use my index finger in simple passages because that's my most, educated finger, where I don't have to have more than one finger involved because it's slow enough, the notes are far apart enough. I tend to use my index finger. I think that's something I'm doing as a shortcut, so I'm trying to force myself to assign to a degree, even if it's just within one song or within one chord. That's something I'm working on. This kind of relates tangentially to our learning principle of the week. Let's talk about genre. I was an English major in college. Genre is kind of just means kind. No, kind of means, in literature, it kind of refers to a broader style. We could say, I mean, there's not strict delineations here. There's no Linnaean taxonomy, but you could say fiction and nonfiction are broad categories. Within fiction, a short story or a novel might be a genre. A memoir within nonfiction might be a genre. A biography is a genre. A genre is a set of guidelines and conventions that define a form. There are very strict genres, like a sonnet has 14 lines. Each of those lines has 10 syllables with the emphasis in a certain repeating pattern, always and everywhere, or else it's not a sonnet. There are much looser genres. There are genres that have changed over time. There are genres that people debate the definitions of. What is a novel? Well, a novel is kind of a book-length story for the most part, but what if it's a novel about your own life? What if it's sold as a novel, but there's the implication that it's a memoir? There was a big controversy about 20 years ago when an author wrote a novel and sold it as a novel, but claimed it was based on his life. It was called like A Million Pieces or something. And it chronicled his battle with addiction, but it turns out he was an addict and he did have a record, but it was greatly exaggerated from his own life. So this was kind of an issue of his personal integrity, but Oprah had selected it as her book club book, and part of the concern was this guy's writing about addiction and purporting to be telling the truth about his addiction. Well, if he like toughed it out and got off crack, but that's not true, and I'm an addict reading that book, and I think I can tough it out and get off crack and don't seek help that might have otherwise helped me, that could be a matter of life and death. And then there's other people who are like, chill out, there's always been an element of fiction in memoir and an element of memoir in fiction, and it's a spectrum. The fact is, genre is less like this set of defined hard and fast answers and categories in most cases, and more like an ongoing conversation. That's especially true in music. We talked last week about the blues and how the blues has been defined differently in different times and places, and how not all those definitions are based on music theory. They're based on things like politics and race and class and fashion and what people do and don't want to count when they're tabulating the most successful song. Genre is a flexible thing, a constantly renegotiated thing, but it is a valuable thing if you are learning to play music. Why? Well, because, for example, one of the generic conventions in folk music is a sing-songy and melodic finger-picking style. So, if we're playing Spike Driver Blues here, we can play it in that sing-songy melodic way and be much closer to the folk tradition, even if we're playing Mississippi John Hurt's blues arrangement. Or we can play it in a much more percussive, sparse, we can make use of techniques like bends and hammer-ons to make it sound bluesier still. We could be do things like that. We can if we're gonna be here on the gonna hit that pinch, maybe we can hit that pinch with a bit of a bend, mess with it a little bit. Maybe we can make use of a hammer-on onto the flattened third in a set of pickup notes before we sing it if we want to make it sound bluesier. Maybe if we want to make it sound folkier, we can avoid some of those notes altogether. We can avoid the seventh voicing entirely and just keep it in a brighter G register. We could even rather than go into our seventh voicing here, maybe we could do more of maybe we could go into even a C voicing, kind of do something totally different with the tune. Those are all options that are available to us that we can kind of do on the fly. There's entire categories of chords that are generally associated with certain kinds of music. So some cases genre can be a music theory thing, like power chords are often associated with rock, hard rock, metal. That's partially just the nature of the electric guitar, but it's also become like a way of playing something if you want it to sound like rock because of that. We talked about how some of those cheap plywood mail order guitars kind of define the sound of the blues, not because the players really wanted those guitars, but because that's what they had. And now people go out of their way to recreate that tone to conform with the genre. We can also talk about things like seventh chords being inherently bluesy, maybe ninth chords being more of a a jazz thing in general. We can talk about the difference between kind of a chromatic run if you're going to do a turnaround. So rather than doing a turnaround where you're instead of just going from, let's say we're from 5th to the 4th to the 4th or to the 1st, you could do like 5th, 4th, 3rd, do a chromatic walk down the chords. That would give it a sort of jazzier feel, more spacious feel. There'd be more room to solo over it, more room for improvisation. You can also use things like rhythmic feel to govern what genre you're playing in. Let's take, let's see. That has an inherently bluesy feel because we're kind of shuffling it a little bit, but what if we just 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that gives it more of a kind of Chuck Berry rock feel. Sounded horrible, but if it sounded good, you would get that. Little things like that are important parts of genre and are important parts of getting the sound you want. The reason this is important if you're learning something is you can learn something like, a Chuck Berry riff for a rock song. You can say, how would I make this bluesier? And you could play with maybe what voicings you use. Instead of going from a E to an A, maybe you can go from an E to an A7. Instead of going in a straight 8s rhythm, maybe you can go a shuffle rhythm, or maybe you can turn something into a triplet that wasn't already a triplet. These are options you have available to you if you're thinking in terms of genre. Okay, so instrument of the week. I'm going to pull it out here because we're going to use it for our alternate tunings tomorrow. This guy is a cedar-topped Art and Lutherie Dreadnought. It is objectively probably the nicest, highest quality guitar I own because it has solid cedar and beautiful tone, beautiful construction. It tends to be a sing-songier guitar than others in my collection. So ostensibly less suited for blues, but we can use things like palm muting to get there. Now, this has a beautiful voice, beautiful articulation, and it is easy to play because of those strings. This is currently in drop D, and we will be leaving it in drop D for the week as we are working in drop D. You will see more of this guitar going forward. It is a beautiful instrument, and I love it. You just haven't seen it much because I've been very focused on the bluesy stuff, and the mahogany just works better for that. Featured piece of gear, which I forgot to bring in here with me, but I'll just explain it to you. There's a product called Cornhuskers Lotion, which is a marketed towards farmers, people who are working with corn, as a lotion for your hands to soften calluses. And what's special about this, I discovered it from a lifting community, weightlifting, kettlebell lifting, etc. What's special about Cornhuskers Lotion is it doesn't destroy your callus. It doesn't soften your skin too much. It kind of softens the skin over the callus and toughens it at the same time. Very valuable for keeping your hands supple but still not soft. Like those fingertip calluses that you're going to have as a guitarist, you want to keep them, but you don't want them to get hard and dry and rip off. You don't want to lose your sensitivity. You just want that skin toughened over time. Cornhuskers lotion is cheap. You can get it at Walmart. It's also good for just massaging your hands at the end of the day, like kind of working into those muscles, because it takes a while to absorb. It does have kind of a greasy feel, but once it's in, it's in. It doesn't smell bad. Great for taking care of your hands. I highly recommend it, and I just forgot to bring it in here. My apologies. I used to have a bottle in every room where I would ever play guitar, but I think I have one bottle now, and I'm always running to grab it because I left it in the wrong room. Shout out for the week is Tom Feldman at Play Country Blues. He has playcountryblues.com, which is a subscription site. I am not subscribed to a subscription site. Don't have the money for that right now, but he has some free stuff on YouTube that is excellent. I've been running through a list of these guys who are good at teaching country blues, fingerstyle blues. His name has not come up yet because I haven't actually paid for any of his material, but I have used his free stuff on YouTube. It's excellent. He has a slightly different teaching style than the other guys. He's very he tries to teach you how to learn by ear, and I'm not quite there yet, but I see where he's going with it, and I appreciate it. So Tom Feldman, Play Country Blues, check him out. All right, guys, thank you very much for bearing with me here. We will see you tomorrow for Alternate Tuning Tuesday.